History is never certain, even for the people who lived it. War games, as time machines, can only give us interpretations of events. In fact, only interpretations of parts of events. Battles are wrenched from context and often isolated as occurrences from a single day. The further we go back, the less certain our time machine becomes, as documentary and archaeological evidence crumble into dust. Momentous events in our civilization are identified based on the word of one or two historians from an age when the very word historian had an entirely different meaning. But the negotiated space between our uncertainties about ancient warfare and the firm rules of a game can tell us a lot about how designers and historians understand what is important in battle. Where games about Stalingrad have to turn too much information into something playable, a game about the Teutoburg Forest must make a vague account of a rout into a lively tableau of blood and iron.
Hi, I'm Bruce Garrick of WarGamespace.com.
And I'm Troy Goodfellow of FlasherSteel.com.
Troy and I are fascinated by games, but maybe even more so by history. We were talking the other day about how ancient history is portrayed in games, so we decided to take a closer look.
The Battle of Gaugamela is one of the crucial events in the ancient world, and a turning point in all of history. It is the defining battle of Alexander's career. While there aren't a lot of games about it, there are enough for us to ask interesting questions about what game designers think about when they try to translate events from long ago that they may not know a lot about.
Well, you know a heck of a lot more about it than I do, Troy.
Yeah, but you have a heck of a lot more games than I do, Bruce.
Fair enough. So we decided to take 5 games from over the years and see what they might be saying, or not saying, about their designer's interpretation of history.
That's basically covering from the ancient days of the gaming hobby up to the modern era. It's a cardboard history of Gaugamela with a lot of modern shiny plastic thrown in as well.
And then we decided to play them against each other, in person.
We will play all 5 games and then compare them to each other.
All right, Professor Goodfellow, since you're the expert, why don't you tell us a little bit about the history of the Battle of Gaugamela, and then we'll sit down and play some games.
After smashing a royal Persian army at Issus in northern Syria, Alexander spent the next 2 years securing Phoenicia and Egypt. This gave Darius III, king of kings and last of the Achaemenid dynasty, time to muster a new army drawn from throughout his realm. Alexander met this new Persian host at Gaugamela, near modern-day Mosul in northern Iraq. Darius had spent his time wisely terraforming the battlefield of his choice into a flat, featureless plain, specifically designed to accommodate his huge numerical advantage in cavalry, as well as his corps of scythed chariots. Though his generals advised him to seize the initiative and attack at night, Alexander refused, just as he had refused the many generous peace offerings coming from Darius. He was resolved to fight a climactic battle in the daylight, before the wakeful eyes of gods and men. Our knowledge of the Battle of Gaugamela largely comes from 2 first-century historians, Quintus Curtius Rufus and Arrian. Both were probably working from now-lost histories written by Alexander's contemporaries, most notably Ptolemy, Alexander's general who later ruled Egypt. The historians of the ancient world agree on most points on the battle. They disagree on a few details, but their understanding of how the battle transpired and the composition and the state of the battlefield are largely in accord. There is greater disagreement on the composition of the forces. Though generally there's agreement that Alexander's army was composed of 40 to 50,000 Macedonians, Phalanx pikemen, middle infantry, and the decisive arm, his companion cavalry, the Persian army presents greater problems. Estimates range from Arrian's frankly ridiculous 1 million men to more modern historical estimates, which put the Persian army at 50 to 60,000 men, slightly larger or equal to Alexander's army. If we accept these lower numbers, however, our understanding of the battle as described by the ancient historians makes little to no sense. Alexander's tactics were original and creative, and would have been unnecessary if he was facing an army only the size of his own. To account for both the larger estimates and the revolutionary nature of some of Alexander's battlefield dispositions, most games and many other historians agree that a Persian force of 150 to 200,000 men probably makes more sense. The Persian line overlapped the Macedonians, and an aggressive commander with more confidence in his center could probably have enveloped his outnumbered foe. Darius was not that kind of commander, so Alexander moved first, advancing his phalanxes in a roughly oblique fashion towards the Persians, while he himself led his elite companion cavalry and middle infantry hypaspists in a diagonal towards the cavalry on the Persian left. The scythed chariots proved to be useless, as they usually did, driving harmlessly through gaps in the Macedonian line or being taken out by skirmishers before they could reach their targets. The key moment of the battle was Alexander's daring charge towards the center. He had drawn off enough of the Persian cavalry to expose a gap between them and the infantry arrow fodder Darius had assembled. He smashed into the infantry's flank, buttressed by his hypaspists, and sending them into a panic, while the phalanxes nailed them down. The one historian has Darius on the left leading the attack, most accept he was in fact in the center, and that he hightailed it out of danger as soon as he saw the battle was lost. On the other side of the battlefield, Mazaeus, the Persian player of the game, was doing a number on Parmenio, Alexander's second in command. Parmenio's job was simply to prevent the Persian wing from harassing the Macedonian center, and he did that as well as he could. But he was eventually overwhelmed by the power of Mazaeus' charge. A courier was sent to Alexander, telling him of Parmenio's danger, so he had to give up pursuit of the defeated king, swoop over, and end the threat to both Parmenion and his camp. Darius was eventually murdered by a coterie of his noblemen. Persia was conquered.
So, the first game we're going to play is Phalanx. This is a game of tactical warfare, 500 BC to 100 BC. That's 400 years. This was published by Simulations Publications Incorporated, otherwise known as SPI, in 1971.
It is a war game older than I am. There aren't a lot of tactical war games older than I am. At least not that are still functional.
What do you think about the rules, having read them and looked at the components and looked at the map, and what do you think we're going to be getting into here?
It's an interesting game in many ways. It comes with a single map, which is dotted with hills and rivers and buildings, which is supposed to create terrain effects naturally for the battle. But of the long list of battles, the only one which says ignore this map is Gaugamela.
So we're playing on a plain sheet of hex paper, but it has a lot of terrain on it.
Yeah, so it's a little bit confusing, I guess. This is a very busy map to begin with, and you're told to ignore all of this, because Gaugamela, as we talked about in the pregame, was famously a flat, featureless terrain. It was kind of essential.
By design.
Absolutely. And the curious thing is, by design for scythed chariots for Darius, which are nowhere to be found in this game at all.
No, there's a lot of odd things in this game. It really is a game that's trying to be everything to all ancient warfare. It just has units that are generic, and then for each battle it tells you how many units of those to choose for each particular side. It has generic leaders. It has a very rudimentary combat system. You just add the numbers and figure out what the odds are.
Yeah, it's really a game about getting the odds and getting all of your units in the right facing to overwhelm your opponent. And it's interesting to have an ancient war game that is so focused on stacking your units. I mean, you can never pay too much attention to this idea of, well, this hex represents this many meters, blah, blah, blah. A lot of that is for, the real nerds to care about, not,
Right.
not serious,
Not
serious,
us.
not us at all. But then it lets you just stack up to a certain stacking limit in this space. You could have like 3 Phalanx units fighting in this 100-meter spot, plus the leaders who don't take any space at all because they're, ghosts. Like Ghost of Alexander in place. So they have, which kind of fits because the map is a very small map. But you have a lot of units piled up together, so there's a lot of counting, a lot of adding, and it gets a little bit, the prediction, I mean, I'm just wondering how this is going to work in first the counting and the adding and how clustered it's going to get, and how quickly it will move. Because this is a concern I have for a lot of stacking games in general, because there's so much adding and calculations. As simple as you make it, once you throw in things like this game has with phalanxes and flanking and different types of units, how this is going to function.
I think that it seems that a lot of this game puts emphasis on the different types of units, but then if you look at the combat results table, it's just a straight odds calculation. And other than unit facing and some melee strength and defense strength, it doesn't seem to take a lot of that into effect. Now, there is a terrain effects chart that changes the combat strengths based on what terrain a certain type of unit is in, but
that's irrelevant here.
We're playing on a flat plane. So, we're very interested to see how 1971 tech deals with 3rd century BC history.
4th century BC, but who's counting?
Not me, obviously. Phalanx comes in a standard SPI flat box with 12 pages of rules, 280 counters, and a map sheet that contains the charts and tables. It's meant to accommodate virtually any ancient battle within its period, so although the units have specific types, such as heavy infantry, light infantry, archers, various cavalry types, and even elephants, they are not associated with any particular historical nation. Instead, they are assigned to one of the 2 sides in a battle based on the designer's parameters. Although, when it comes to the swordsman symbol, 9 years later, in the game Ragnarok, about the passing of Fimbulwinter and the assault on Asgard, SPI realized this more historically accurately represented dead Viking warriors in Valhalla. Units in Phalanx have multiple ratings, including melee attack, representing the unit's basic strength, melee defense, representing the unit's basic defense, movement, stacking points, which dictate how many units you can put in a hex, melee defense from the flank, which is a reduced strength when being attacked from the side or rear, and unit class, which is a way to increase or decrease effectiveness when fighting certain unit types. But most important is the difference between frontal and flank defense, because each hex side through which a unit is attacked is resolved as a separate combat. So while these 2 barbarian infantry attacking these 3 phalanxes have a total strength of 12, a frontal attack means it is compared to the phalanx's frontal melee defense, which totals 18, for a total of 1 to 2 odds. The 3 swordsmen, on the other hand, also with a total strength of 12, attack the phalanx's flank defense, which totals only 6, for odds of 2 to 1. You can see from the combat table that low odds attacks have no chance of eliminating a unit, only demoralizing it, which is the D result. Multiple demoralized results have no additional effect unless a demoralized unit suffers a DD result, whereupon it is eliminated. In our example, a roll of 1 on the 1 to 2 column would demoralize the phalanxes, and a 1 on the 2 to 1 column would eliminate them. It's this kind of repeated hammering that is at the core of the phalanx premise of ancient warfare. The map in Phalanx is meant to serve, like the counters, as an all-inclusive representation of ancient terrain, with different features being active in different scenarios. In our scenario, the map is a flat plane, and thus the terrain symbols will be ignored. The most important single unit in the game, though, is the leader. In order to move, a unit must start the turn within 1 hex of a leader. The only exception to this is in what are called Type 2 armies. In them, cavalry can ignore this rule and move freely. In our game, the Macedonians are just such Type 2 army. The Persians are not. Can I move first?
Mm-hmm.
Bruce puts his leaders in the center and charges forward with his best units. This means his flank units won't have any leaders to allow them to move, and therefore, they will be immobile.
Alright. Start with cavalry.
Troy counters by swinging his cavalry wide, as they do not require leaders to move, while he moves his main force forward to engage the Persian center.
And he has no stacking, so he's going to here.
But Bruce gets his cavalry in behind Troy's cavalry and demoralizes them. After Bruce checks a rule, the main forces collide. And then the counting starts.
Alright. So here, you've got everybody taking on your elephants.
Okay, how many people?
All of them.
Okay.
So that's 4 times 6 is 24, plus 9 is 33, plus 24, 57, plus 12, 69 versus
18,
plus 6 is 24.
no, 18, 59 plus 59 plus 8, 59 to 8 plus 6 is 14.
So
4 to 1.
4 to 1. 3.
D.
Okay.
That demoralizes Bruce's elephants, who will spend the rest of the game randomly charging
That's
around.
your elephants, pretty much.
Right.
Because from now on, they just everything they do, you got to roll a die.
Right.
And that is it. That is the story of my life.
Okay. Well, then let's move to turn number 3.
Turn number 3. Now, do your elephants do something? Do you have to start with them?
The elephants now move each turn according to a die roll.
2. There's your elephants.
Neither Troy nor Bruce likes this very much.
That's a silly rule.
I agree.
Elephants are always done differently in every war game, and you always have to have some rampaging rules. But you get a single attack, and that's pretty much it.
And it never feels right, as far as I'm concerned. Bruce reinforces his center and attacks Troy's archers.
2. I'll take on my archers. So he's dead. He just killed Parmenion.
He's making some headway thanks to the favorable unit matchup.
4. Any other ones?
Okay, that's a 9 to 4.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a 2 to 1?
Yeah. 2 to 1. 6.
Nothing. Okay, let's try here. So it's 9 to 1.
9 to 1. It's impossible to screw up 9 to 1.
4. 1 eliminated. So he's gone.
And that's worth 10 points.
Is it worth 10 points?
I believe so.
Let's try these guys, which is 4, 12 to 1 to 2.
Plus my commander.
There's a lot of fiddling in the center of the line, but that's where the action is.
My commander is 6. So that's
Even with what
18
seems like a large advantage in units,
2.
fertile
9.
attacks don't yield very high odds.
wow, just a 1-to-1.
Mm-hmm.
Because
That'll do it. That'll disrupt those losers.
There's a lot of die rolling, but the map doesn't change very much. This is mostly due to the combat system, which makes it very hard to eliminate units.
It's 15, 2 to 1.
2-to-1.
5.
Units get demoralized, but unless they get a DD result afterward, they can rally and have to get demoralized again, and then suffer a DD result before they can rally again.
That's it. Get all these.
You have to have very high odds to have a chance of eliminating a unit outright, which is generally impossible against strong stacks.
5.
The momentum changes very slowly.
Takes a lot for anything to happen. Takes a lot of really good dice rolls on getting the odds up in your favor.
And these units just stay sort of in contact and nothing happens for a while. Which I
Yes.
wonder, it might be actually more realistic than we think.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stasis and pushing and hoping for the die rolls to go your way. You wait for the disruption, and the disruption cuts into things. But then you've got to get a disrupted unit isn't necessarily disabled because you've got to keep rolling the double D, right?
Right.
To take out a disrupted unit. So
Right.
these guys could just hang out there
Forever.
for a while. I mean, you're like all in here in the center.
Right.
That's you're pretty much given up on
Mm-hmm.
these guys where I'm trying to push.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also got Alexander stuck here. He can't go. He's my most powerful commander, but he's kind of stuck. But it does really limit the battlefield. There's not a lot of movement. You don't get
Right.
the sense of movement and motion you would in an ancient battle game, I would think. So I guess do we think of the era as an era of mobile warfare or of guys just slugging it out?
I don't know. You're the expert.
Let's take a closer look at what's happening in the center. Bruce's Persian swordsmen and hoplites and heavy cavalry face off against Troy's Macedonian hypaspists, hoplites, and peltasts, with Alexander facing off against the Persian leader Mazaeus. These units are in contact, which means they must stay and fight until someone retreats. The D markers show demoralized units that are vulnerable to being eliminated by a DD result. The Persians have additional unengaged units on the right of this line, and the Macedonians have a formidable force on their right wing as well. Both forces could lend additional weight to this push of spears in the center. But the fact that these units are more than one hex from a leader means they cannot move. So the central fighting will continue until one side or the other gets a lucky hit, tipping the balance. Unless something else happens first.
Now your units are kind of stuck. Now there's not a lot for you to do beyond, because these guys are all in contact.
Mm-hmm.
So you've just got, and these guys can't move.
Right.
So you just, all you can move is this.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only thing you can move is that one unit.
Yep.
Well, of course, the elephants.
Speaking of which, let's roll and see where they go.
Let's roll the elephant.
Let's try this. One.
Bruce uses his second leader to bring up the few uncommitted units he has left in the center. It quickly becomes obvious how static the battle has gotten.
One. That's all I can move.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing, huh?
All of these units, and you can move like one step. 15 to 2, 7 to 1.
7 to 1. 4. D. Great old D result.
I've got a lot of D's going on here. It's 2 to 1. And that's something.
That's a DD. Don't move into that hex.
Right. And
The weight
we'll
and
have
number
this
of Bruce's
combat
attacks are beginning to tell,
Which is
as Troy's units are first demoralized and then eliminated by some lucky DD results.
versus something. Whichever one you're taking on.
I'll take on these guys. 1 to 2. Nothing.
Nothing. Alright. Alright, so cavalry.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike Bruce's cavalry, Troy's cavalry can move on its own, and it now hits both of Bruce's immobile flanks. But because it takes so long for one side or another to gain an advantage, Bruce is hoping that his center will collapse Troy's center before this matters.
Alright, here we've got 4 into here.
Mm-hmm.
He's retreating back for the next turn. Move those guys up.
Mm-hmm. How many points do those are archer dudes?
Yeah.
So they're 2 each, so they're 14. Okay, go ahead.
This battle over here, this Calvary Battle,
Mhm.
we've got 12 and 12 is 24 versus what? 3? So it's 8 to 1. 3. One of the defending units is destroyed. The choice of the attacker. It doesn't matter. It
Doesn't matter.
So, yeah, destroyed a unit.
One of those cavalry units is dead.
Over here we've got 12 versus 6. 2 to 1. 2 to 1. A 1.
Demoralized. Alright, and the last one, same thing.
3.
Demoralized.
Okay.
Turn 6. First one is to go here. 1, 2, 3. I'll try to rally those guys.
Okay.
Anything but a 6.
Bruce brings in a leader and rallies his demoralized troops. It's almost too easy.
That's easy to rally.
Sure is.
Alright. 3 to 1 and 2 to 1.
3 to 1. Nothing. 2 to 1.
Bruce is really fixated on the center of that Persian-Macedonian line. He can just sense that the Macedonians are starting to crumble.
Right.
So 1, 2. Turn 3.
Sometimes the rules give us problems,
Half, right?
and we have to puzzle them out a bit.
The melee is their defense half?
Their melee power, melee strengths are cut down, not below 1, and unable to attack. So their melee strength must be, well, if they can't attack, their melee strength's cut in half, and that's defense, right? Disrupted, they can't attack, so the melee strength's only relevant in defense. It's
Right.
cut in half, so it's what?
Right.
Needless to say, we're anything but cutthroat about it.
Oh. DD.
2 more?
So 2 more
Eliminated? 2 more slingers.
slingers, so that's 4 more points for me.
Eliminated troops count against a size demoralization value,
And then
which, if reached,
I
will cause the whole army to flee.
We've got a combat here. into combat here.
But Troy isn't idle, and his cavalry is making its presence felt on Bruce's left flank.
So they're in contact.
Yeah, we just not acknowledge that. 2.
But it's the right of Bruce's line that will see the decisive combat. Why isn't Bruce paying better attention there?
Cluster.
Probably because he's mesmerized by how well he's doing in the center.
12, 2 to 1.
So 1 on 2 to 1 is?
DD.
DD means I lose.
All of them.
What?
All of the demoralized guys.
What? Some of them. Well, that sucks. That was actually quite a bit of dudes. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Boom.
Mm-hmm.
And boom here.
Mm-hmm.
And here. These guys are going to move forward and up in this attack here on that guy.
Mm-hmm.
Alright, so I moved these heavy cavalry to take out Darius,
Mhm.
and here's where the very weird Darius rule kicks in. I think it's kind of an overpowered rule.
Mm-hmm.
Darius, I mean, the unit can't move, but if I get near you, you have to run away.
Mm-hmm.
You have to run away towards the edge of the map. You lose points when you leave the map, and because you put him at the foot of the map, which makes sense because it takes a while for me to get there, he's got to push himself off the map, and
Right.
that's 30 points for me.
But according to the rule, as soon as you move adjacent to him,
Yep.
it's treated as though we'd reached the
Yes.
demoralization level. So even though we go to 74,
The effects are up here. We're not really at the panic level, but effectively we are.
right,
And panicking means that all of your units are running for cover. They run for it. Unless
Okay.
they are stacked with or near a leader, everybody starts running.
right,
Or of course, if they're 10 units away from an enemy unit, they're fine. And Macedonians and high pacifists and Roman swordsmen don't panic, but that doesn't
Okay.
apply to you. So they're panicked, they can be rallied. And I don't know how we would mark this. But effectively, like, all of these units run for it. All of these units run for it. These guys don't. These guys run for it. These guys don't, but these guys run for it. So effectively, the game is pretty much over at this point because these guys start heading for the end. There's no one nearby to rally them. I will be hitting them pretty much at a huge penalty for
Right.
them. So
well, you've only got one more turn.
yeah, I've got to play this out too. I've got to finish
Right.
these battles here, and they might be enough to push you over to the panic level even more. But we're getting into the decisive victory territory for me, which doesn't feel like how the battle was going for most of the thing.
Well, that was because I made the mistake by leaving Darius
Unprotected.
unprotected. If I had left him, if I had given him protection, though, we'd be at 58.
Yeah.
Which is still within.
Still within marginal, but I need a decisive victory for it to count for me.
Right.
Whereas marginal works fine for you.
Right.
So
But if I hadn't had, but I needed to have, it would have been a
Yeah.
draw otherwise.
So we can play this out, but there's not a lot of point, I think, because
No.
there's nothing you can do.
Nope. I think my guys just have to run for the board edge.
You have these guys are active, and these guys are active.
Right.
And everybody else is heading for the hills.
Yep. I think so.
So how do you think that went?
Well, obviously it didn't go too well because I lost.
But you weren't always losing.
And to be honest, I don't know that I necessarily did lose. Of course, by the rules of the game I did.
Yes.
But I think that really, the battle was really almost won, or at least drawn, in the center of the map. And there was all this auxiliary stuff that went on that didn't seem really tied to the battle, but it was very important.
The game has this really weird rule. It's a sub-rule. It's a special rule that has Darius, the king of the Persians, as kind of the king target for the Macedonians, which makes sense. That was Alexander's strategy from the very beginning, to hit the middle, find Darius, capture him, kill him, whatever, and then Persia is his. But for the Persian side, in Phalanx, Darius is an immovable unit. And you chose to stick him way at the back of the map, and that meant he was an easy pickings for me if I could get my units down there fast enough.
Well, what I really should have done is I should have simply circled him with a bodyguard of units, because all those other units that I had, they weren't doing anything. They were just sitting around, and so they could have easily just as easily sat around Darius rather than in the middle of nowhere. And that's where the leader rule really came into effect. I was always wondering when I read those accounts of the battle where all these historians say that Darius's army kind of just stood around and most of it didn't do anything. But that's exactly what we saw in Phalanx.
It's an interesting system to require units to be adjacent to a commander in order for them to move. A lot of other games, and we've talked about this in the podcast, 3 Moves Ahead, the whole problem of leadership in war games. And in ancient battles, especially the way they're written about by ancient historians, there's so much emphasis on the commander having the roles. It's all about what did Caesar do during the battle, what did Alexander do, what did Parmenion do. And Gaugamela, you have this huge mass of infantry, as portrayed in most of the classical accounts, and as shown in this board, which is very much in line with what Arrian talks about in his history. A mass of infantry that are kind of going nowhere because you have 3 commanders, the Persians, one of whom can't move or do anything, and therefore is effectively useless as a commander, and 2 others, compared to the Greeks, who have 3 good commanders, who can effectively move more around the map, though they have fewer units to begin with.
So I thought when we started playing this game, and we kind of joked about it before we played, that, oh my gosh, this 1971 tech, it's terrible, right? I mean, can you believe these rules? But the way it worked out, I mean, there was a lot of sort of ineffective back and forth pushing and shoving that seems to be sort of this push of spears that a lot of historians sort of endorse.
Yeah, we had a lot of infantry clashes in the center, which is kind of historically where they would have happened. We had my phalanxes and hypaspis bouncing up against your hoplites, and there'd be disruptions, and then we'd rally, and we'd get them back again. And it's a very odd disruption rule, where you can, if you're disrupted, all you need to do is move a undisrupted unit next to it, and then you roll a die, and you've got a 5 and 6 chance of rallying your unit again. So we had healthy units trying to get that magic advantage, because it was all about getting the advantage, the mathematical advantage, and the odds in your favor, and hoping you would roll the 1 or the 2 that would lead to elimination of units.
And I think that the way that the game sort of encourages you to fight, it encourages you to fight from multiple sides at once of a hex, because you get to attack from each hex side. So you can attack from one hex side, get a demoralization result, and then attack from another hex side and get that DD, which eliminates all the demoralized units before the other player can rally anybody. And I do think that there are some problems with the rally rules, but they kind of fit with the way that they want you to play the game. And there are other questionable rules. We could never really figure out what happened when you hit somebody from the rear and you were in contact. Could they not move? Could they not turn around? There's some rules issues that this whole thing has, but overall, I was actually pleasantly surprised.
I was also surprised by how well it seemed to play. The differentiation between the 2 armies was quite strong. The Macedonian cavalry can pretty much run roughshod and do whatever they want. They don't have to be tied to a commander, because these are the disciplined elite troops of the Macedonian army, and that was kind of the key to my victory, doing that left sweep into your wing and isolating Darius even further. The fact that you do have to have the combination of units was good. I also think we've got a good grip on where missile units fit into this conception of war.
That was definitely a weird thing in the game.
Because the missile units all had a range of 1, which was, it's kind of great, but then they're just, if you stack missile units together, then they end up getting hammered. Now, maybe, thinking now, back, maybe there should be a missile unit stacked with the infantry. Then they have the defensive advantage, but they also get a fire shot before you do your melee attack. And that may be, because mixing in infantry and skirmishers is something that many of the ancient armies did do. It might have proven to be a more effective strategy than lining up my archers for them to get routed by you.
In the same 100-yard hex, though, as a phalanx? That's how they did it?
Well, probably not. They probably didn't do a lot of things that we did in this battle. They didn't have commanders running back and forth all across the map trying to get guys moving. Sending commanders from one group of units to the next group of units. I only really got my right flank moving by marching a bunch of swordsmen up and then sending my commander back to move more skirmishers up to your inert left wing. So there's a lot of weird rules. But I was actually surprised how well it played and how interesting it was. And I think you're right. What was going on in the center was where all the fun was, but it had nothing to do with the final outcome.
Thanks to 1971 tech, though, you still needed tweezers. to try to get all those units to stay in the same place.
The hexes were way too small.
That would never happen today.
And it probably didn't happen in 331.